There we go. All right. Hi there. Welcome to the very first event for Friends of Figma Iconography. My name is Noah Jacobus. I am the community advocate for Figma, focusing on this area of interest and the craft and love that goes into icons of all stripes. When I'm not doing that, you can find my work in products made by MetaLab, where I work as a design specialist. Now, if you want to keep up with what we're doing in this chapter, tune in for future events like you're doing right now. Oh, this is me, by the way. Forgot to change to that slide. You can join the chapter at friends.figma.com. There'll be a link at the top where you can view all the different areas of interest as well as different localities. Hey, sorry, got sidetracked. My buddy Andrew's here. And then you can also follow along, of course, at FOF_icons. You can, of course, hop into the Friends of Figma Slack as well. You can find that at the previous website as well. And there you can talk about all manner of things related to Figma, education, accessibility, design systems, or even find a local chapter in your city or country. I know that they're adding new ones all the time. For example, San Diego just joined. They'll be having their first event next month, I believe. I'm not in San Diego. I just have some friends that live there. Figma also hosts its own conference called Config, which just actually happened last week, if you missed out. But talks are going to be going up from it on YouTube. Some already are. Some will be added very soon. Some really cool new features were announced that make using Figma even easier. And I'd love to kind of talk about some of those really quick here at the top. First up was branching, which if you're a product designer or work with product designers, some folks are going to be really excited about this. If you want a more Git style approach to version control, that's going to be available very soon. They've also added a brand new mobile app, which is really cool. Super great if you're trying to check out your icons in context inside a product. Rest in peace, Figma Mirror, you'll be missed. But this is a lot more useful because it'll allow you to take more prototypes on the go, do more user testing and stuff without having to be anchored to what you're currently doing on a desktop machine. Pretty soon, they're going to be adding audio chat to Figma, which is pretty awesome. I am all for something that lets me run fewer applications. So maybe I don't have to be in Zoom as much during product demos, which would be super great. But you may already hear my MacBook trying to take off like a jumbo jet doing this. Also adding a higher user limit, because that's one of the biggest strengths of Figma is being able to collaborate with other people in real time with the multiplayer feature. And so now the limit for how many people can be in a file is going way up to 500, I think. So maybe that'll be something we'll take advantage of in an upcoming event, where we can all kind of collaborate and have fun together in something. Another huge thing, the Figma community is coming out of beta, being opened to everybody. If you are not familiar with that, it's a really great resource where people can publish files that can then be downloaded and remixed and re-uploaded by other people. I have some work up there. I have some icon sets and some other pieces that I've thrown up there. It's a great way to dig in and learn how to use Figma, see what people are doing and how they do it. Super great. Some of the resources from this will actually be available on the community right afterwards, if you're interested. And last but not least, probably one of the biggest things coming out of Config was Figma's brand new whiteboarding and brainstorming product called FigJam, which is also sounds like a delicious name for a fruit spread. This was super cool to see. I've already used it a little bit for ideation around some icon projects. Also a little bit biased because I got to help make some icons for it along with some great friends. So if you find yourself trying out FigJam at all, you can find these in the components pane in the little toolbar under the name Candy Bites, because I'm a huge fan of Necco wafers and I decided to try to immortalize them in icon form. So all that being said, all these upcoming new features and everything are super great, but this event is about the basics. We're just, brand new folks to Figma. So let's dive in. kind of first, sometimes I get the question like, why Figma? Like, why is Figma a big deal? Why do you care about this? It kind of boils down to a few things. It's quick. It's super fast. I mean, if you're coming from the world of Illustrator, Illustrator can be a little bit clunky. It's immensely powerful, but for the purposes of icons, it's kind of too much for me. It's slow. It takes forever to scroll across the canvas. Figma is much quicker. It's free for starting out. Starter projects are free. You don't need a subscription. And it makes the kind of vector editing for icons specifically a breeze. Plus, you can make them in the same environment as the excuse me, the same environment that your team may be using for interface work. So you can test them out in context right away, build the library, the whole deal. That's a huge advantage, not having to import things constantly. So we're talking about the tool specifically, the mechanics of switching to Figma for icons. Won't talk as much about like ideation and metaphor creation and that kind of thing. So look out for that kind of stuff in a future event, maybe. So in this first section, we're going to talk about some things that might be familiar to you if you're coming to Figma from another vector editing program like Illustrator. Some really basic stuff like the layout that you're working with, some of the basic tools, shapes, fills, strokes, how to get nitty gritty with focused editing and vector points, Booleans, my favorite, the pen tool and the vector networks. And all along the way, we'll be providing some super handy dandy keyboard shortcuts that I love. So let's switch over to here. This is Figma. If you've used, it's not that different really in layout from a lot of desktop editing applications these days. And it's basically 4 pieces when we look at it. We've got our toolbar at the top that has all of our basic necessities kind of up here. Things like moving, creation of various kinds, commenting and other things as well, which we won't really get into here. You can kind of ignore that stuff for now. We've got our left-hand pane that kind of covers all of our layers. So every little node or element that is on your canvas will show up over here. And then we've also got the right-hand pane, which is a lot more contextual. It just allows you to edit properties of whatever you've got kind of selected. And we'll look at how that kind of behaves. Because right now, nothing is selected. So this is kind of giving us an overview of the canvas itself, as well as various styles that I have already created. We'll get to a little bit, so you ignore that as well. Then, of course, the meat and potatoes center, which is the canvas. All of your a number of frames to kind of walk us through some frames. If design, I said, like Illustrator, earlier boards probably allow you canvas to create your designs. Here, you see with the little cross-hatched icon. Unlike, somebody says no. A lot is this only for? Would love to know that if the audio is through okay. Get that's unfortunate. Very choppy. That is not. Switch my mic really quick, and we'll see if that does anything. How does that sound? Is that any better? Other mic was better. All right, I'll go back. I will say, you might be off better using Chrome than Safari or some other browser for this. I had that issue when I was watching a stream using this platform earlier. I could turn off the camera. That's a good idea. You don't need to see my ugly mug. All right, we'll continue on. So we're talking about frames. Frames are basically artboards. So this allows you to create, so unlike traditional artboards, say in Illustrator or something like that, you can nest frames within each other. So this allows you to create more complex designs that work together. Frames also give you access to extra functionality like layout grids and auto layout and constraints and prototyping and stuff like that. So let's take a look. So for this instance, I've kind of got a couple of frames that I've already made here to kind of show a couple of different ways that I like to set up my icons initially as kind of the very basic starting block. I always create my icons within frames because then they're easy to edit and export and all that kind of stuff down the road. So this is a couple examples of a couple of different ways I've set up frames for icons and to kind of get my key lines sorted, where in one instance, sometimes I make an entire set to help guide me. And other times I've used Figma's kind of baked in layout grids. Shout out to Bonnie Kate Wolf for that tip. This is something that she does, or did at least, I believe, in a previous article that I had read about that. So, and we can also look here, we've got some handy dandy keyboard shortcuts for a lot of these different things. So if I'm going to recreate these are a little bit bigger. As we can see, when we actually click on something, we can get its properties over here on the right. They automatically update, and we can see exactly like its coordinates on the canvas or within this other frame, its height and width, and some other various things that we won't need to worry about just yet, but some more advanced stuff down the line. So if I were going to recreate these at actual scale, let's say we wanted to make some 24 pixel icons, what I might do is actually zoom in a little bit, which you can do with Command plus and minus, or Control plus and minus, depending. And I will actually hit the F key to pull up my frame, or I can always click right up here at the top and get a frame right away. And so what I'm going to do is just click and drag, and I can see my dimensions right away. I'm just going to go ahead and hit Shift to make it stay constrained, and then make a 24 by 24 frame. And there it is. It lives over here, nested right within this little example that I've got. And it just lives right here. If I zoom in far enough, I can see where all the individual pixels are. So just to make it a little easier on myself, I might give it a stroke over here. And I can choose where it lives, whether it's inside, outside, or center. And I think I will make it pretty thin, just so I can keep an eye on where it lives. And then if I wanted to make key lines, what I would really want to do is actually start with some very primitive shapes. And those can all be accessed easily up in the toolbar as well. And you've got a lot at your disposal here. Rectangles, lines, arrows, ellipses, polygons, and stars, which are all, and these two are very editable as well, and you can adjust number of points and all that sort of thing pretty dynamically. For our purposes, I know that I'm going to probably start with a circle. So I'll start and draw it right here, which you can also access by hitting O at any time, and that can make you a circle. And that will be the foundation of my key lines. And I think I'll probably want it to be stroked, but it has a fill on it right now. So what I might do is actually just reverse it. And one of the things that really got me into Figma at the time was how some of the key commands are the same as in Illustrator. So if I hit Shift X on this, which I believe is the same in Windows and Mac, yes, then I can just reverse it super easily, flip it. You can see these two fields. So I've got a circle. I'll hit R for a rectangle, make one of those. And I think what I'll do, copy and paste, easy to do, just like so. Make another one, resize it, easy to do with all the handles on the corners. And essentially, I've just made myself, I might make this even a little bit thinner if I'm going to work on them super zoomed in. I've effectively made myself a nice set of key lines. And these can be grouped up very easily. if you hit Command or Control G, you can create groups, which are different from frames in that they just kind of hold things together and they don't have special properties like grids and other things that frames could do. But for our purposes, super easy to keep them contained, easy to toggle their visibility on and off on the fly to hide them when I don't want them anymore. So honestly, that's pretty easy on how to create your base shapes. And if we want to get some of these diagonal pieces, we can go up here to hit, say, the pen tool, which we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that a little bit more in a second. With that, that opens up just a nice little point. So if we click, actually make sure I'm getting right on the edge here. If we click, we can easily just click another point. We can actually make our pieces just like that. I'll do a little wizardry there and easily create some diagonals as well. Gregor's a question, is there any special reason for the sizes of the rectangles in the circle? Yes, this is a pretty standard set of keylines. This is more the mode of keylines that Google uses for its icons to help maintain visual balance between different sized icons. And if you're curious about that, we won't go into that too much. But if you're curious about the reasoning for that, there are some resources at the end that will go into that much more in depth. Helena's article, for example, is very good about keylines. Keylines Demystified, I think it's called. Now, if we wanted to go a little bit different and we wanted to try something like this, let me just duplicate this one over here. Easy to do. You can hit Option and drag it, just as you would expect in most software. And we can just delete these. We'll delete these and get them out of the way. Something that frames allow you to do is something called layout grids. These come in very handy in product design. For our purposes, though, they can also provide some of that shape guidance. So if I turn these on really quick, you can see that automatically creates a default, an 8-pixel grid. It kind of breaks this up into thirds, which you could use something like that if you wanted to kind of keep that guidance. But it also allows you to change the type of grid you're working with. So in this case, I might want a column, and we'll keep it in the center. And I think I want it to be like 20. Oh, not 20. Not 20 columns, 20 pixels. There we go. Because I know that I want to keep like a 2-pixel padding on that. And I can add a second grid if I wanted to say a row, 1, keep it in the center, make it 20. So you can keep layering these on if you wanted to try to keep some of that guidance for yourself. But these can also be turned on and off very easily through some key commands to show layout grids. So in this case, Option G, turn them on and off. If you want to have more of a quick on and off across the board as you're designing icons, rather than having to toggle on and off key lines individually, that's a good way to do it. So that's a kind of a quick and dirty approach to some of those basic shapes and how they can kind of be used in frames, which are kind of our building block that we'll be building our icons inside of. Next up, this is very similar to Pathfinder functionality in Illustrator if you're used to that, Boolean operations. These combine any set of shape layers through one of these 4 formulas, either unite, subtract, intersect, or exclude. Boolean groups are treated as a single shape layer, and they share fill and stroke properties and can be combined with other Boolean groups through subsequent Boolean operations. They can get pretty nuts if you start nesting some of these and some of the cool stuff you can do. We're going to take it a little easy today, but these kind of function exactly as you'd expect. So for our purposes, we've got 2 shapes here. I'll zoom in a little bit on unite. We've got just a circle and a square. So what you can do is you can select these individual pieces and go up here. This is where all your Booleans live. And you've got them all handy right here. So union does exactly what you would expect. It kind of forms them into one shape. But if we open it up, if we do it like this, we can see that the individual pieces within it are still available, still editable. So if I were to take union, and like we talked about, when you have something selected, all of its properties are visible over here. we can do something as simple as going here to our corner radius little window and giving it, say, a radius. And that gets our Boolean, which is super handy. But since these are still editable, I can go in here, I can shift this around. The effects remain, which is super handy. It's non-destructive. If we do subtract, it's kind of the opposite. It functions like you'd expect. It takes whatever the top element is and cuts it from the bottom. And this can work in multiple too. So if we added a second circle, then both of these objects would be cut out of the square. And it can have rounding applied to it as well. And they can all move around. Things do get a little squirrely when you're right on vertices, but that can be avoided. So you can kind of have some very interesting stuff. This is super time-saving when you're dealing with overlapping elements in icons, let me tell you. Intersect does something very similar, where whatever the crossover of those two elements gets preserved, and exclude functions in the exact opposite, where whatever is overlapping is cut out. And if we look actually at one of my favorite things, which is outline mode, which is the same as it is in Illustrator, Command Y or Control Y, we can actually see all the elements still in play that are involved in these Booleans. If we zoom in here, say on one that we've rounded, we can see the rounded shape that is created versus the pieces that are actually making it up and cutting things out. So I love outline mode, super helpful for potentially finding lost elements or seeing exactly what's going on behind the scenes. Parts that are making things up can help you troubleshoot some issues potentially. So that is Booleans. Oh yeah, I should share this one too, since it is tied in with the menu itself. Something that you'll probably want to do a lot as you're cleaning up your icons is flatten selection. That does different things depending on what you're doing. Say if you had a stroke and you had rounded a corner. Oh, thanks, Miggy, for pointing that out. Yeah, I think Boolean actually, it comes from logic mathematical background originally. Why it's that word, I don't know, but it's cool. It's a cool word. To go back to flatten selection, looking at these, if we wanted to basically make it destructive or make it not in the same way anymore, if we wanted to clean it up, what we could do is we could hit either Command E or Control E, or you can go up here in the menu and hit flatten selection. And what that will do, actually we'll look at it in outline so it's a little bit clearer. If we hit that, it basically does away with that and makes it into one solid flat object. So it's still vector, of course, but if we look at the different points involved now, it has expanded it out, made the rounding kind of solidified. And so those are not editable anymore. So as you're cleaning up icons and handing them off per se, that's going to come in really handy for kind of packaging everything you really nice, especially when you're going to be exporting to SVGs or things like that. So super useful to know. My favorite, the pen tool. This one is mostly blank because we're actually just going to draw some stuff real quick. We looked at the pen tool very briefly in our first look at frames as one of these kind of basic primitive things we can do. So if we hit P and we bring this up, it kind of works as you'd expect. If you just keep clicking, you can make a bunch of points and then you can bring it back and it kind of snaps to itself if you want to close it. And you've got, a funky polygon. And we can increase, say, the stroke size or something like that. But one of the things that helps set Figma apart from other programs that I've seen is something called vector networks, in that if we wanted to, let's remove a point and do something like this, you can. And this interesting little node is still all connected here. You're starting to build a network of nodes, kind of like a spider web, that all stay connected to each other as opposed to being separate elements. And for icons, that can be a lifesaver. So when you're actually in here, when you've got any kind of shape and you want to get more of those, that direct vertex control, when you've got anything open, even like a rectangle, if you hit enter or return, you've got direct control over all the vertices. So for something like this with a vector network, we've got that same kind of control, and we can edit each point individually. So for example, let's make a new one. If I wanted to create a curve, something with more Bezier handles, I could easily, let's do that, bump it up to something a little bit bigger. And what I could do is select a point after I hit enter. And you can see here, either by using command or control, I can get into bending, which is also accessible right up here at the top, the bend tool. If I hold control or command and click it, I will add Bezier handles to a point. And that will give me all these nice curves. And I can adjust each one individually. If I do like option, I can edit them even more individually on each kind of basis. You can even do this when you're first starting out drawing and you hit, if I click and drag and then click before releasing, I can create curves right off the bat. But if you're editing a lot of vectors like this, something that you'll probably want to do is a lot of joining and removing of extraneous points. So say I had two separate pieces, like something like this, something like this. These are two separate pieces entirely, as you can see on the left-hand side. These are two separate vector elements entirely. So something that I could do, first off, I could use that handy-dandy flatten selection that we talked about. And in this case, that will actually combine the two of these into one, so that when I hit enter, I can easily select one point, another point, and I can hit either Command or Control J and join them together. Now, if I had one of these that was curved, so let's say if I hit Command and make this one curved, and I'll delete this, and I wanted to connect these 2 points, but I didn't want it to just be a straight line. I wanted this curve to continue. Actually, I'll move it like this. I wanted this curve to continue to influence the new joining here. Something I could do is, and I learned this from Miggy, so shout out to Miggy. If you select these two, you can do one of these key commands, Command Shift or Control Shift J, and that will create a smooth join where it will, based off the Bezier handle on one side, it will kind of guess at what the best option is for joining it with a similar curve on the other side. Now, say you are dealing with a lot of points. Maybe you're editing some kind of janky SVG that you brought in, and there's too many points. There's points all over the place. Let's add in some points. And you know that you're not going to need, say, this. It's like, that's a straight line. Why is there an extra point here? You can take any point you've got in a closed shape and delete and heal, which I use literally all the time. So Command or Control and delete, and that'll easily remove a point for you. Oh wait, that's Shift Delete actually. You're going to see behind the curtain real quick here. I'm going to use a variant real quick, which we'll get to in a sec. That'll be edited for the community version, don't worry. There we go. And also a nice cleanup thing as you're dealing with icons, and something as well if you're trying to get more finicky cutouts. Up this way up. It's very easy to outline a stroke as well. So if you don't want this to be a stroke anymore and you want it to be technically like a filled object, what you can do is either Command-Shift-O or Control-Shift-O very easily. And now if we say turn on outline mode, we can see that we have outlined it. And so now it's technically 2 paths. So helpful to do when you're doing cleanup and need to, if you're not handing off stroked information, say. Now, let's talk about scaling. I used to deal with this a lot more when I would work in Illustrator and work at an enlarged size, but for our purposes, this is just something really handy to have. So I've got a couple of icons here. I've got a couple of frames with icons in them, and we can look at the outline mode. They're built a little bit differently. One is still strokes, as we can see. Actually, I'll click on it so we can see them living over here. And this one has been outlined, like we just did. Something that you'll want to keep in mind as you're working on these, and especially working with other designers and figuring out how these are going to be implemented, is going to be making sure that things are scaling correctly. So for our purposes, if we take this frame, we can scale it like we did when we first made a frame, but we noticed that some weird stuff is kind of happening. First off, it's stretching a lot, but also the stroke size is not changing. The strokes are staying the same no matter what I'm doing. And if we look at this one, I'm not sure what's going on here. It's going side to side, but not up and down, which is strange. So ways we can mitigate this, just in case you don't ever want to get into all the rules around scaling. If we look at how some of this is being treated, with stroked information, it can be very handy to use this scale tool. There's a tool specifically for this, which preserves stroke and style information no matter what you do, which is super handy for scaling icons and scaling up effects as well. If you end up using different kinds of gradients, or you're using, oh, thank you, Jory. Yes, you did point that out. I will get into that. That was on purpose. Shh, it's a secret. No, you're good. For stroked information like this, if we want to keep everything, all of the ratios the same as we scale down, something we can do is we can just hit K. And that's accessible up here with the Move tool. So if we hit K, well, actually, let me select it first. If we hit K and we scale it now, it preserves the stroke size relative to the frame size. So everything stays the same. So if we took it back down to, too far. If we took it down to, let's say, its target size, like 24, it behaves as expected. And we can zoom in. We can see that we've got 2 pixel strokes, and it's all very nice. For this one, like this, since it's outlined, what appears to be happening is some of the constraints have been screwed up. And this can happen, inadvertently maybe, or somebody didn't implement something right. So if you want to change it that way, this is something that frames have that other objects don't, say like groups. Something you can do is very easily say that you want all of these things to scale. You're basically telling how the object should relate to the frame around it, how you want it to relate to the different sides of the frame. So if we change both to scale very easily, we can resize this one too. No muss, no fuss. Granted, you could use the scale tool on that one too, and everything would be perfectly fine. But just a little bit of extra troubleshooting. Probably besides outline mode, my other favorite kind of view mode is actually pixel preview, which I'll look at here, which you can access very easily with either, excuse me, Control P or Control Alt P, depending on what platform you're on. And this is an absolute lifesaver when it comes to determining a lot of accessibility concerns around low density displays. With K, how would you specify a size you want versus dragging? That I don't know about. Specifically, I typically drag them. But if there's a shortcut for that, I'm sure Miggy or somebody else could throw that in there if you, oh, there's a plugin. Another thing about Figma, fantastic plugins. But let's jump back to pixel preview on this real quick. When you're designing for low density displays, this gives you, as you can see down here, pixel preview enabled 1x. That lets you basically see what you're doing, how this would appear on a low non-retina low density display. I already work on a display like that to kind of keep this stuff top of mind. But this is great to make sure that what you're doing is staying really crisp. If I go over here and look at this one, making sure that everything is functioning as it should. I actually realized I designed that one wrong. And that's perfect. You can see exactly if you've got something misaligned. This piece I had on a half pixel instead of a whole pixel. And so that's a great way to find out these kind of things if you're wanting to get the ideal low density experience. So pixel preview, it's a great thing. All right, let's move to the next step. Now this is kind of the break between halves. I think I'm running a little bit over time, so we'll try to power through this as quick as we can. I wanted to show really quick 3 different ways, which maybe we'll only do a couple, using some of these experiences to draw a heart, the bane of of icon designers everywhere. So a way that we can kind of figure out how to do that. So I've got kind of 3 blown up versions here and then 3 little tiny workspaces down here. So let's dive in. So I think the first way I'm going to use Booleans for, we can look at that. Then I'll try a couple different ways using the pen tool, and we can kind of see how that works. So if we dive in, if I'm just going to use Booleans, maybe I'll just make a couple shapes and then tie them together. So if I zoom right in on this little icon, I've already got some key lines set up. So I'll probably start with just a rectangle. And I think what I'll do, I will hit enter so I can get into focused editing mode and just start moving points around. So I think what I'll do is something like this, maybe. Just start with Yeah, why not? We'll make a weird shape like this. And what I can do is I can actually duplicate this shape and flip it horizontally. So in this case, that's Command or Shift H. And I can basically make another weirdo version of this. I'm actually going to edit this slightly. This is not what I wanted. Delete and heal. There we go. Something like that. And I will duplicate it essentially. Adjust a couple rogue points. So if I had something as simple as this, I could basically take these two and unite them. And once they're united, I could start applying rounding to them if I really wanted to. So if I wanted to go, oh, well, that's way too much. What I might actually do is edit this on a slightly different basis. Take these points and make them roughly like that. Take these, round them up like that. And you could do something as simple as that. And then if you had your union, you could make it outlined. You could round the union itself. Say if we wanted a little bit of curve just on the tip and where these two things meet. Love those two things. Very nice. And you can keep editing these if you wanted to kind of make a heart that way. So if we wanted to do it a little bit differently, I'll actually make this guy scale like we just talked about. And then it shows up nice and big over there. With the, and this is what happens when you don't use the scale tool, by the way, because the pieces themselves, the rounding elements, which are still editable, do not scale. But if we flatten it, ooh, look at that. Let's try it with the pen tool. And we'll use some Bezier curves on this one just to make it a little bit more interesting. We'll skip the third one for now because we're running a little bit behind. Thanks, sound issues. So what I'll do here, we'll start with the pen tool, just a P. And what I think is I'll actually go like this, go up to here. Again, make it really simple. Go here to here to here. I'm also very grateful for the guides when you're working within a vector network. These red lines show up, and so it tells me when certain things are aligned. Super great. So if I start with something like this, and then what I think I'm going to do I'm going to select some of these points and hit Command and bend them with the curves so that then I can get a little bit more granular control over these. And then what I will do with these is actually round them using the rounding tool. So if I go back up here and hit something like that, I can very easily curve those off, have a little bit more granular control over these ones to get a little bit more of that organic form going around. And then I'm not relying on just the computed rounding. And I'll go ahead and make some of these bits round too. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. We'll flatten that one up, make it scale, and then it shows up nice and big up there too. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about combining primitive shapes. You can draw everything by hand. You could also draw it much more rigidly with the pen tool and round it up that way. So it's actually fairly straightforward to make some of these simple shapes like this. I'll skip number 3 at the moment. Feel free to do that. Experiment with it a little bit more. Now, in our last little bit, we'll try to power through some of these bits of things that may be new, including some stuff like quick actions, styles, components, variants. Might skip variants as well, something that may be a little bit too in-depth, but if people want to stick around, we can talk about that too. So let's dive in. Part 2, styles and effects. As we're looking at some of these. This is actually one of the icons that I made for FigJam. And you can see that it's got a few things going on. There's a gradient inside. There's a few different colors happening. And there is kind of a shadow applied too. So as you're working with color in icons, a really handy thing that you can do is actually create styles that are easily replicatable across the board. So if you have, say, one particular color that you're using, you can apply it to a bunch of different things. And then you can, if you need to, you can edit that color and its changes will propagate across every usage. So in this case, I've just got some gray circles. If I select one, as you can see in the little color pane down here in the properties, you can pop that open. You can adjust color this way, or you can hit the little eyedropper tool, which you can also access by tapping I. And this will open up a little loop up in the upper right for you. And you can easily kind of get in here and get any of the little colors that you need to. So say if we wanted to transfer this color scheme to this icon, I could say, oh, I'm going to sample each little thing. And I got, okay, there's a white thing. There's, but the gradient, when I'm sampling that, it would actually try to sample any particular point along this. I can't sample the gradient as a whole. So something you can do, which is super handy, is actually being able to take an object's properties and copy them wholesale over to something else. So in this case, I know that I've got this gradient, and you can see right here how that's kind of built. So if I select it, I can hit Option Command C or Control Alt C, depending. And now that that's copied, I can go over to another shape, because I know that I probably want this to kind of mirror that, the large central shape, and hit the Paste Properties keys, and it copies right over. So rather than having to rely on like sampling piece by piece, it's really easy to kind of copy styles over entirely. Now, it would have been even easier if I had gone to this and chosen to create a color style. There's much more in-depth walkthroughs on all of this kind of stuff on Figma's website and various other Figma videos. But just as kind of a quick sample of the kind of control you can have over this, you can easily pop in and say to create a new color style, I want to call it, blue gradient. And now that lives in my styles. So if I select anything, I can pop open my styles and I can easily select something, edit it. It will change across the board. Say if I went in here and decided to change this blue to a yellow, it would do that across every instance. So super useful. All of these things can be, since I'll just wrap this up, easy to do. So I could do that across the board if I really wanted to. So it came in super handy with FigJam because there were about 6 different color schemes that we were using. So easy to make tweaks across the board. One of the other really big important things around Figma is its use of being able to use objects as components. That's one of the other great things that frames can do specifically. And what that allows us to do is create basically a main version of something that we can kind of copy, but if we make a change in the main version, the copy will change too, kind of like with those color styles. So in this case, we've got some icons here that we've kind of made, and we're going to make them for a tab bar per se. So in this case, I might take some of these bits and turn them into components. So you can see there's key commands for that specifically to create components out of things. Something that I will do is actually create multiple components. If you have multiple things selected, you can make them all into individual components together. So I'll do that with those, and I'll do that with these ones down here too. You can see they change. They become purple and they get a new little multi-diamond icon thing going over here. So you can, and in outline mode too, you can see that they're a little bit different now. So the nice thing about that is, and I might actually change these to, you can see here, renaming. I'm just going to do this real quick. We'll change it to thick. We'll rename this one to home, this one to files, this one to settings. So I've got these 3 components now. And so what I might do is I'll duplicate one and put it right up here. So it is it's an instance now, excuse me, of this icon. In that, actually, I should show you this first. If I change something here, say if I went in here and started moving points around, as you can see up at the top, it's doing the exact same thing. But they are independent in some important ways in that I could restyle this one without affecting this one. So if I went in here and I took off this white background and I wanted to make this icon white, I could. And I could still edit this and it will still be reflected up top. So this is monumentally helpful for light versus dark mode icons, any kind of color shift that you need to do, anything like that. So if I actually move all these up into their places, and I will take off these backgrounds as well. I can make them white too. And they'll still all be instances of the pieces below, which is super great. I actually won't need to show this one off just yet, so we'll leave it there as to how components kind of function, which is super helpful. But if we're talking about, since we were talking about light and dark mode, something that's also super helpful with components is being able to create variants of something. So if you had a light mode version of something, a dark mode version of something, something that was selected or deselected, or you needed, like we were talking about during the icebreaker, if you needed icons with secondary elements, like if you had a user and you needed, add, subtract, blocked, confirmed, and they were all using the same basic building blocks, just kind of variants of the same thing, Figma makes that really easy to easily swap out. So in this case, if we had kind of the same tab bar situation, let me actually take these backgrounds off ahead of time. I could take these 3 icons here, and I'll make them into components. And then I'm going to rename them. Actually, let me do this first. Make these into components too. What I can do is, now that all 6 of these are components, and they don't have any names yet, they're still just frame, but I can take, I want these 2 to be related to each other. So I can take these 2, and since they're both components, Figma says, hey, do you want to make these variants of each other? So if you hit this button, you can, and it makes a nice little box around it so you know that these 2 things are related. So I might rename it home. And you can see that there's not a lot of information here. It's giving me a little bit warning because they're essentially the same in how they're being identified. But it kind of creates a default property for us. And we might want to change that to state if we wanted to make this like active and inactive, for example. So if I were in there, I could easily say, well, this one's inactive because it just has outlines. This one, I'll say it's active. So now I'm not getting that error anymore because I've got these two states already laid out. So what I can do is these are components just like we had before. So if I make an instance of one, I can easily kind of throw that up right here. I'm actually going to change the colors on this. The main component is going to stay exactly the same. Outline and fill, we'll make that like 30%, something like that. And then since these are related to each other, if I select any version of this that's like floating out there in this instance, it will give me an extra little drop-down in the properties panel where it will let me choose. Let me actually make that one white too. It will let me choose between the two states. So this is super helpful for any time you're building out navigation elements and tab bars, and anytime an icon needs multiple versions of itself, you can easily swap these kind of things out on the fly and even animate between them. But we're not going to get into that. Noah's question, within the instance? Yes. Yes, in this case, that information is saved within the instance itself, that color change has happened. It will stay in there. If you knew that you could also make instances within instances, you could nest this kind of stuff across the board. Is that good practice? No, I would not say that is good practice. I would make separate versions where that is more explicitly laid out, of course, especially if you're building a design system. But for our purposes right now, quick and dirty, it's good enough. Thank you for that question. And so we make sure that we actually leave some time here at the end. I know that was kind of a whirlwind tour through some stuff. That's mainly the kinds of things that I use the most. If you ever need any other quick references to things, I have some extra pieces laid out here. These are all links. This file will be in the Figma community right after this is over. And all of this will be available very soon. So I'll blast that out very soon. If you're ever stuck with something that you're trying to accomplish in Figma, there's a good chance that you can find it by hitting the quick action menu, which in this case is Command/ or Control/, and that will help you do all kinds of things. Like say I want to, do a union of objects. If you don't remember where those live, you can easily hit those kind of things. How to ungroup things if you're like, create link, create component. Maybe I want to, create a variant. That kind of stuff can show up, as well as plugins. Plugins are searchable in here too. Like something I use a lot is Stark's plugins for accessibility. You can easily pull that kind of stuff up too if you want to check contrast and all that sort of thing. Super useful. And it can help you get to all kinds of key commands like flatten selection. It'll tell you what it is. Also handy, and every single keyboard shortcut you can find is easily available in the bottom right here in the question mark. You can hit it here. There's a key command for that too. And you can easily find basically anything you'd want to do very easily if you're not sure where it lives in the product or how to go about doing it. Super handy. A few resources I've kind of put together as a kind of a plug for myself. A video that Raji and I did last year for Figma about designing a cohesive icon set. That definitely goes more on the side of best practices for cohesion when designing icons, rules to look out for, things like that. some things I've written about the fundamentals of icon design. Figma's own video about pen tool basics and vector networks goes much more in depth than I was able to here. Basically anything by Helena. She's written some fantastic articles about icon design, and those are linked there. And then Bonnie Cates Wolf, excellent piece, A Beginner's Guide to Iconography, is also available as well. And as I said, I will blast all this out. We do have, I'm okay going a little bit over if people, we do have a little bit of time for specific Q&A. I realized that was probably a little bit too whirlwindy to maybe absorb a ton of stuff, but if there's any specific questions, I would love to hear them. Or if there's something that was already asked in earlier that I missed, please yell it out again. I would love to hear it. And maybe I'll get to learn something new too, because I'm learning new stuff about Figma all the time. You can throw it in the chat, or I think there's a Q&A tab as well, but I believe that is currently empty, but feel free to throw anything in there, and we'll see if either myself or the hive mind here can answer your question for you. When exporting icons as SVG for devs, outline or solid? I would say that depends. Depends on what the... Depends on the devs, honestly, in my experience, as to how they're going to be implemented. If you know that they're going to be implemented at the intended sizes and everything, I have no qualms about handing over stroked icons. Or if that's part of, say, a stock set that you're building, and that's one of its strengths, is you want it to remain editable. I have had some projects where I have not had as much faith in its implementation that it would be done correctly as intended. And so in those cases, I will give outlined icons to ensure that they maintain, say, the level of detail and the different ratios between their elements correct. Oh, thank you. Raw strokes can be smaller file size per performance. Yes, that's true. And Helena has a really good piece too about icon exporting best practices, which maybe we'll need to do an icon itself about that. Laura wants to know about quick animation. Yeah, animation, unfortunately, smart animation in Figma is super helpful for a lot of small icon pieces. I think that would require its own time, just because I think I honestly tried to pack a little bit too much into today's, so that would kind of need to be its own piece, I think, because there's a lot of meat on them bones. Let's see, what does Quick Ray say? A pretty newbie question earlier about pen tool curves. Is there a method or plugin to have really granular control over curve handles? I always feel like my curves are wonky and imprecise. Figma does give you pretty granular control. Let me jump back to, say, the heart here. Oh yeah, I outlined that one. Boo. Well, that's why we left the third one open, right? So let's say we do this. Just by clicking and dragging, you can easily get to any whole or half pixel. But as Miggy just mentioned, you can, you can select the point itself, or you can select the handle. You get a different set of vector coordinates for those, so you can be as nitty-gritty as you want to, up to 2 decimal points, I think. So you could say, 14.18, and make this 1.12. So you could get super nitty-gritty with the individual curve handles if you really want to. For my purposes, I never have needed to get that nitty-gritty, just because snapping to whole or halves has always worked very well for me. So I feel like that may help keep your curves more consistent if you keep them snapped to some degree. Easier to tell when they're not aligned with each other, that's for sure. Well, look at this, Miggy with the extra tips. Oh. Yeah, excellent question. Export animated SVG icons. Animation is only for prototyping, at least at this stage. There very well may be some plugins for doing that sort of thing. I know there are some fantastic animation plugins. Like you can even do very like basically a mini After Effects within Figma where you can do keyframe animation and that whole thing. I've only dipped my toes into that a little bit. I typically stick with Smart Animation to use as a guideline for actual animators that I work with. But yeah, as far as I know, no baked in way to do that yet. Yes, thanks for that, Noah. Some extra Bezier alignment. Stuff I first started learning when I was doing more type design back in the day. But yeah, alignment of handles is important. Swap on back over there. But any burning questions remaining? Love to hear them. If not, I will wrap things up. Oh yeah, thank you. Where do you prefer to start? 24 or 16 pixel icons? It depends. 24 versus 16 is an excellent question. That information will typically surface from me. Actually, I might just talk for a second here. We'll stop sharing. Turn this back on. That kind of information typically surfaces for me when I'm performing an iconography audit during a project, and determining best usages of icons, where they need to live, and all that kind of thing. And those kinds of needs will surface during that time. If I'm making two sizes of the same icon, I will absolutely start with the smallest version to determine how it needs to appear, because it's always easier to add detail than to strip it out if you need to scale down. So that is typically where I go. I saw a couple of questions about the recording. It is being recorded. I am recording it. It will go up. We have a YouTube. There is a Friends of Figma icon YouTube. It is empty right now, but this video will go up there, and then I'll blast it out once it uploads. If you want the reference, and this some of these little worksheets that I was going through will be available on the Figma community as well. If you want to kind of do a little lunch and learn with yourself, it'll be great. Let's see if there's any more things throwing in. Thank you for coming, everybody who is having to scoot out. Oh, hi, Laura. Icon Dad, yes. Did you mention how to align pixels on grid? Figma snaps to the grid automatically to whole and half pixels for the most part. So that's actually very easy to do, and with pixel preview turned on, very easy to notice when that is not happening. So in my experience, it's actually way harder to get things off the grid than it is in Illustrator, which happens to be a lot. Not to throw too much shade at Illustrator, because I still do use it occasionally, but I have not actually opened Illustrator in 8 months, maybe. So yeah. So all that being said, everybody, thank you so much for coming here, talking through the basics of icon creation in Figma. And as I said, we did record it. It'll be available soon if you want to go back through anything or show it to somebody. In the meantime, if you've got any feedback on this session or what you'd like to see in the future, we've got some ideas cooking about some good stuff, some interviews, some workshops, some other things. Please don't hesitate to reach out through Twitter. You can also email through the chapter page on friends.figma.com. So yeah, thanks so much, and hope you have a great rest of your day, or if it's late, go to bed. Bye.